My favorite camera.
Okay. Uh, when did you get that Leica?
I got the Leica in 1962 when we merged with the Skagit Herald, and before that I had a Suraflex, which I used when I went to Europe. I used that as my camera of choice, and then when I came back, I used it to take pictures for the Anacortes American until we merged with the Herald, and they said no longer could I use my Suraflex, that they were changing to Leicas, and that was when I learned about available lighting and all things like that, and I just had a wonderful run with the Leica.
Yeah, the results are beautiful in the exhibit that's up at the museum now.
Yes, yes.
And that nice large Seroflex that Gary
Right,
made.
that he did was just a remarkable piece of work.
You graduated from college in
1948. I had spent 3 years in the Army and then came back in 1945, and from that, then graduated from the university, went to work for the university for a year in the athletic department, and after that I went to Europe for a year, came back, and I was going to go to San Francisco to get into theatrical promotions. And during the week that I was home, my brother said, "Did you know that the local paper was for sale?" No, I didn't. I went down to, because I had worked there when I was in high school, went down and they almost threw me on the floor. It was so for sale. We ended up bought it, and our first issue was May 27, 1950, and I never regretted that I stayed in my own hometown, and it was just a remarkable, remarkable experience. I've had a great life.
But your professors weren't exactly enthusiastic for you.
When we bought the paper, several of the people, as a matter of fact, the publisher of the Anacortes American was also a professor at the University of Washington who taught a thing called printing processes. And so when he was ready to sell the paper, we had people on the faculty who were aware of Anacortes said, "That is the boneyard of Washington State journalism, don't even get near it." Well, when we were young and we had nothing to look forward to anyway, we decided to take the gamble. And I had a partner named John Weber. We owned 50%, he owned 50%, I owned 50%, so neither dominated the other one, and we all together were in the newspaper business together almost 45 years.
And you came back to Anacortes at a time when things were in transition.
It was the economy was going again in reverse because World War II was over. The Depression was, of course, in the 1930s, which desperately affected the town, and we had when we came back, it was just on the brink of the mills. The lumber mills were going out of business. Ultimately, salmon canneries were, and we were a town without industry, and it was really another unique period in the community's history.
You had some ground to gain in terms of you bought a business that people were enthusiastic to sell,
right?
Which seemed to imply that there was some work to be done in making it a success.
And there was another newspaper in town called the Daily Mercury, and it was going out of business also. So about the time we came in, it went out of business, and shortly after that, we decided, against the advice of everyone who knew us well, don't put out a daily for the community, and we did anyway. And it was called the American Bulletin, and they said it's not going to last a month, and it lasted 11 years.
What was your schedule like in the course of a day, say, for when, just an average day of work?
Well, for one thing, that small town newspapers don't have abundant staff, and we had to do a little bit of everything, from sweeping the floors to washing the windows and taking photographs, writing editorials, going to council meetings, all these things. And so we really had a full schedule.
I mean, it sounds like a 12 to 16 hour day.
Very much so. very much so. And we, when we got the American underway, we made some, I think, some pretty dramatic changes in the format of the newspaper, and very heavily on local news, that this was it. And when we went daily, we were the smallest daily in the state of Washington to have an Associated Press wire. And Associated Press was so fascinated by us that they put it in for nothing. And we paid a little bit every month, but they did the installation for nothing because they were just fascinated by these two guys who had the guts to try to put out a newspaper in a town that really didn't have all that much to offer.
And was that a two-way street ever, where things that happen locally would be picked up and promoted?
Such as?
Well, Mariners pageant. Well, I guess that was over.
That was over because that began in the 1930s, and when we came back, they revived it in 1957, and then that was the last. Ultimately came the Anacortes Arts Festival, or Anacortes Arts and Crafts Festival, now the Anacortes Arts Festival, and that was in 1962, which took the place in here. This year they celebrate their 75th anniversary, and it's still going strong.
So I guess, for instance, the Bobo story, did that ever become a
Oh, I was fascinated by Bobo because here was his family taking in this gorilla, and it was just a baby. I went up and took some of baby pictures, which are still in request now, of him in his little crib and with a rattle and so forth, and I have them down at the Woodland Park Zoo. They have pictures that I took, and also in the Museum of History and Industry, also in Seattle. They have some of my Bobo pictures.
And just as a little background about who brought him and why.
Well, it was brought by Bill Lohman, who recently died. He died within the last 3 or 4 years, and he was a notable local character. Heart of gold and great as they come, and he had always in school he had taken, I think it was biology, would have been anthropology. Anyway, he became interested in primates, and when he was back in Cincinnati on a trip, he found this person who had 2 baby gorillas, and he bought one of them and brought it home, and his mother and father, he lived in their home. And they had a little play area for him that they added to the house, but finally Bobo became too big to handle, and they took him down to the Woodland Park Zoo, where ultimately he died.
Yeah, he became a regional icon, really.
Oh, right. That's the town where Bobo lives. I heard that many, many times.
And just speaking about that period of transition, there was lumber was the #1 industry at that point, with 20% of the workforce employed.
Right.
Second was the fishing industry, and you, with some others, started to think about what could be done to analyze where the community was.
Right.
Can you tell a story about the Poston study?
Well, we were at a critical point in the community's life, and so a group of us got together to decide, how do we address this? And we started by organizing a group called the 5440 Club. It was 54 men, and notice I say men, 54 men and under 40 years of age or under. And we were there to evaluate what could be done. And this is why we ultimately came to the Poston study, linking up with the University of Washington. Dr. Poston came up to Anacortes to get us started. And it was really a remarkable piece of timing, because one of the things that we were deeply concerned with was that industry in Anacortes was just, it was dying. And so midway through this Poston study, which involved incidentally about 1,700 local citizens, during the course of this, Shell Oil announced that it was locating a refinery, and none of us knew anything about that, but that was locating a refinery here. And in 19, could you hold it for a moment?
Yeah, we'll take a look at it.
Here, I'll.
Post study.
Right.
But you were doing a perfect preamble, which was about the 5440.
Right, right. And that group, it lasted for about 2 years, and then after Shell came, there wasn't the need for, and after the Poston study and after Shell came, the club abandoned. It didn't, because there was no need to have these analytical meetings, and but it did serve a really a remarkable purpose during the 2 years that it was organized in Anacortes.
It seemed to have created an area, a forward thinking about the community.
And that's what it was. And these were, we had teachers and we had millmen and we had a little bit of everybody was represented in that club.
And simultaneous to the intellectual work,
right,
the actual getting to know each other.
Right, and that did help because the people really took pride in the organization, and they enjoyed going out and doing things that were constructive for the community.
About this time, there was an election in city government.
Well, that came in about 1957. What we had been working for was city manager. And
it was defeated the first time around, though.
Well, city manager was, you're right. But when they finally, it came through that it was in 1957. And that created a bit of a hurrah in the community because some definitely didn't want it. And that's why it failed the first time. And then the next time it only won by about 0.1%, but it won. And then it was until 1975, the city was run by a city manager system. Then,
can I ask why you were an advocate of the city manager over the mayor system?
Well, I think I would rather not answer that. Let's just hold on for a minute, and I'll tell you quickly, because they didn't get the quality of people to be the mayor of the town, and that was why.
So I see.
It had to do with that. Mm-hmm. Right. And
that's why I asked if I could ask it.
Sure, okay, yes. And that's why I fouled up and I won't answer it.
So there was, with the arrival of the Shell, the construction of the refinery,
right,
the High Point, 3,000 construction workers were in town.
Right.
How did that affect business for the community and for your business?
Very much so, and it did to some degree affect our business, but there were not, at that time, there weren't any new businesses that had come in to take the place of ones that had gone out of business and so forth. But it really created a lot of economic impact when the refinery came. And new houses, many in the building, in the housing area. That's where, because we were a town without housing for the type of people who were coming in with Shell. And
then quickly on the heels of Shell, well, within a couple of
came
years,
Texaco, and that also it helped because it did a lot of people who were not a lot, but a number of people who worked in the mills and so forth applied for jobs and got jobs with Texaco and Shell, and that was a boon to the local industry. They were local people who were hired to work at the refineries, and just a remarkable turn of events locally.
One of the things that's covered in the Poston survey is the degree of community and, I guess, town unity.
Right.
And numerous mentions are made about the role of sports and especially basketball.
Right. Well, basketball was something that that Anacortes really had name recognition outside the community itself because of the incredibly outstanding basketball teams that it had, and particularly in the late 40s during the Richard Wooten era and the 1950s into 1962 when Bill Taylor was the coach here. People all over the state knew where Anacortes was because of its basketball teams. And they did very well at state tournaments. In 1956, 55 and 56, they placed second to Lincoln of Seattle in the state tournaments, and the town was locked up to go down and watch these teams play. And a little different than in Forbes' area. So
you paid a lot of attention, both as a writer and a publisher.
Absolutely. Because it was something that did draw attention to the community, and it was something around which the community could rally. Sometimes they couldn't agree what time of day it was, but when it came to the basketball team, it didn't make any difference whether you were a banker, a lawyer, a garbage collector, what have you. This was a joint love affair that went on over the basketball team.
And you still had to get in line.
And when we had the old gymnasium, people would get in line at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. A lot of them with sack lunches because we only had an 800-seat gymnasium. And ultimately, it led to building the museum, the gymnasium that's here today. The very first year that we played there, Anacortes played for the district title in that gymnasium. And it was so filled that people said, and a lot of local people couldn't get tickets. So they, one said, if I don't get in, I'll drive my pickup right through the wall and park on the floor. We got together and got the KVOS from Bellingham, Channel 12, for $2,000 to come down here, and that was the first and last district tournament game that was ever televised. But that saved rioting in the streets.
That's amazing. And they had a several-year winning streak on that court.
Oh yeah, they had it was about 48 to 50 games, and they lost their first game in 1959 to Cedar Woolley, and that was. But anyway, on we go. Can we stop for a moment?
Sure.
Now, I saw you looking at your watch, and do you have a schedule that you?
I'm great. I have to leave at 3, but these guys are going to stay. I have nothing to do.
Well, okay. I just want to make sure that I wasn't encroaching on your.
I'm going to sneak out at 3, but.
Okay. Well, I don't think we'll be going on that long. Do you, or do you know?
As long as you want.
Yeah. Okay.
As far as I'm concerned, and I think Forbes as well.
Yeah. Well, okay. Just so long as I know that this is not keeping you from something that you've got to do.
I can bring my sleeping bag over.
Okay.
This is important. This is a big.
Maybe you can have visiting rights with your cat. Okay.
Well,
let's move on.
We'll move on to the end of the. We covered the basketball team being second in state. Then we are looking at when the Pioneer, the mills started to close in town.
Right.
That industry, but it had been replaced then by Shell.
Well, one of the major mill closures was out at Skyline, which Flounder Bay, Burroughs Bay as they called it, and the Walton Mill closed down in about 1952, and a group of people who wanted to make a resort area out of it bought it, and that was the beginning of the Skyline as we know it today. It produced a remarkable new population that lives out there, and many of them in retirement.
Which is a change then to now.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of the age of the community.
Right.
It seemed to be much more of a working class community then?
Living out there, oh yeah.
Affluent, retired
A lot of the little houses out there were built by mill workers who wanted to be close to work. And in the beginning, this mill was founded as the E.K. Wood Mill in 1922. And it operated up until it closed, and then ultimately the Walton brothers from Everett bought it, and they then sold it to a group from Bellingham and Seattle for recreational. There was going to be an internationally known recreational center, and that didn't quite develop either. It is more for housing and boating and the likes.
One of the most lasting contributions is your focus on history.
Right.
And the creation of the museum.
I think that's an important point, because when we first came back to town, except for old files of the Antiquarians American and a few things, and a few individuals around, there was nothing that had been done to preserve local history. And so the third issue that we put out, we put a banner headline, a banner editorial across the front page saying a serious neglect is the lack of a community history. And we urged in that editorial that people bring their photographs in, if the old photographs we'd have them rephotographed and so forth. And that was the beginning of the museum itself. We finally, in 1947, I think it was Mayor Tony Mustasich, created a history board, which included Ann Biesner, Doug Burton, Lloyd Foster, and Madge Stafford and myself, and that was in 1957. And then we, in the beginning, basically all we had was pictures, and we had a wonderful photographer here named Glenn Davis, and he enlarged a lot of the pictures you see in City Hall today and up at the museum, enlarged them to 16 by 20 size, and had them framed, and and they were displayed first in City Hall because we had no other place. And ultimately, when the library moved from 8th Street to 10th Street, the building was taken over by the Museum of History.
And as it should be, you are currently the subject of an exhibit there, your photo collection.
Right, right.
You tell us about your history as a photographer.
Well, there are two facets of the display down there. Now, they represent pictures that we collected from here in town back from 1950 up until 1957, and then to 57, and then we can we hold it for a moment?
Do you want some water or something?
No, that's why I'm losing track. Where was I?
We're talking about the photo collection, the two facets.
Okay.
One is the collection.
Oh, okay, the collection itself. That's right. Now I lost track of what that was leading to. Okay, that includes photographs that we collected from 1888 to through the 1900s and then there were photographs that I took myself while I was working with the Antiquarians American. So it's a mix of photos that I took in the 50s and the early 60s, and photographs that we collected from citizens of the community to help give a historical background to the community.
And you told me that initially in some of your photography classes for journalism with the old 4x5s that you didn't have a particular attraction to that.
No. When I went to the University of Washington, I majored in journalism, which I'm sure wouldn't surprise you. But one of the courses was photography, and they had these Graflex photographers with a suitcase and everything like that. And I said, I am not interested. I don't want to be enslaved by all this equipment. And so they let me graduate without photography as one of the courses that I had to take. When I went to Europe, as I was just about ready to cast off, I thought, what is it everybody has that you don't have? It's a camera. And I went down to the university bookstore and I bought a Seriflex. and they taught me how to put the film in it and this and that and what have you. And once I began to see what you could get with a camera, I almost wish I'd become a photographer instead of a general newspaper type, because I loved it and still do.
And you tell about your earliest writing.
Well, my earliest writing was a story of an Anacortes Bellingham football game played up in Bellingham in a driving rain, and we, for the first time in 20 years, beat Bellingham with a field goal, 3-0. And I was so excited about it. I came home and I wrote my first. They had a typewriter in the hotel, the Wilson Hotel, which is now being resurrected as we speak. And anyway, there was this typewriter, and so I, one finger at a time, tapped out my whole story, and I had a little piece of the goalpost pasted on, and that was, and it also appeared in the Searchlight, the junior high school newspaper, and so that was the beginning of my love and life of journalism. I found out that since I wasn't an athlete, I could do something that would please athletes and coaches.
And you mentioned also a story about Betty Loman.
Right.
Where she had...
She was my babysitter when I was a little kid. I was when I was in the 3rd grade, and I would write little stories, and she would take them to school, and she was taking typing at that time, and she would type them out for me, and I delighted in seeing that my work in print.
Do you think that had an influence?
Yeah, I don't know where the influence with newspapering began, because I never found myself heading in any other direction. And when I was in school, it always played a key role in anything I was doing, and I was able to do it and write about it at the same time.
Yeah, it's I marvel at the level of commitment that you have had throughout your Anacortes years and also in your Oak Harbor years.
Right.
Just an incredible faith in whatever community you were involved in.
I am a believer. And here in Anacortes, we were involved with the start of ACT, the Anacortes Community Theater, because we wrote an editorial. So, what would it be like if we got together and laid out some plans for community theater, and people responded to that, and I went to the first 3 meetings, and that was the originating. But there's so many people who have, like Walt Vonnegut, who is just absolutely, has been a lifelong arm of strength to the community theater here, and many other people. But it is still going 40-some years later.
And are there any other examples of the what might be called advocacy journalism, where it actually bore fruit in the community?
Well, one was the paving of the streets, and it was just a knockdown, drag-out experience. It was the first was the 9th Street LID, is what we call it, Local Improvement District, and it took 2 years to finally get enough people. You had to have 60% of those who lived along the route wanting it, and finally it came through, and that was the beginning. We had 52 miles of unpaved streets in Anacortes when we came back here, and they were all just dirt streets. There wasn't even a street from M Avenue that passes the middle school on out to 32nd Street, and all of this ultimately was the result. But that one LID was absolutely just, it was the unhappiest time of my life in newspapering here in Anacortes, because it was hell. But we finally won, and you can see what's happened now. I mean, it's just mandatory. If you're going to build a house, you're going to put a reasonable street in front of it.
Right. At
that time, and when I was a child, to keep the dust down on the streets, that we lived on 9th Street, and they had pulp liquor from the pulp mill, and nobody ever thought that it might cause nose cancer. but it was the only way they had of keeping the dust down on the streets, using the liquor from the pulp mill.
Your parents were involved in the hotel and the movie business.
Right, right. My grandparents bought what is now the Wilson Hotel in 1897, and they owned it until 1954 when it was sold to a Lily Kirchgessner, and I can't recall and Jim Brown. And now I marvel at what I see as I drive by there. The restoration of that building they've just done a superb job. But that was a family enterprise. I was an elevator boy for a number of years, and we had the first elevator in town put in the hotel when they did a remodeling of it in 1929. And they did, it was an Otis elevator, and I used to take salesmen with their luggage up to their rooms and get a dime as a tip and thought I was wealthy.
And did you work at the movie theater?
No, I never did. My father was involved in it, and then the Depression came along, and the thing went out of business. But it was no, I didn't. I just saw the first talking movie in Anacortes at that theater, and I can't recall what it was. It must have been something with, I don't know. I can't remember who it was, but it was a cowboy movie. I know that.
What about the Opera House
on Sixth Street? That was built in 1890 or 91 too, in that time frame. And there were some names that came through there on these traveling shows. Like there was I'm trying to think of the name of the woman who ended up on Broadway, and she was, and in my lifetime, she was a remarkable actress, and who achieved fame far beyond the IOOF Hall.
And that was, so there would be a show a week there, or was it more in?
Well, they would have some good and some bad, and they would come particularly during the winter months, but some of them were just outrageously bad. But this was a form of entertainment. It was before TV and moving pictures and all that, and that was how they got their entertainment.
You were in high school in
1941.
You were involved in a underground magazine of sorts.
It was called The Ghost Sheet. And I had a bit of a falling out with my journalism teacher and decided I will show you. And so I started my own little paper called The Ghost Sheet, and it ran for 17 weeks. It went to the end of school. We sold it for a penny apiece and then turned the money over to the Red Cross. We still had I was a humanitarian, but the journalism teacher turned out to be one of my best friends in later life. And he was a person I just admired enormously. But he worked with, I was also the editor of the Annual, and worked very closely with him. And he was just a remarkable person. His name was William Chance.
Your family, for a time, you went to school at Campbell Lake.
Right. Well, my family lost its home on 9th Street during the Depression, and my grandparents had an old farmhouse type thing right on the edge of Lake Campbell. We moved out there in the summer, and then all of a sudden we weren't coming back to town, and I was wondering, why am I having to go to this little one-room school? It was a one-room school with 8 grades in one room. And I was I started in the 4th grade out there, and some of the boys in the upper grades were big enough to play professional football, and they made my life miserable because I had braces on my teeth and wore glasses and was not athletics. Okay, enough of that.
when we've covered a lot of stuff from the 50s. Do you want to talk some about, say, Bill Taylor as somebody who was here kind of a parallel period to you?
Right,
and,
right.
I mean, he stayed beyond as a teacher, but his
Right.
basketball phase.
Right.
Did you? How much of the success of the program, the basketball program, was attributable to
Bill Taylor? Oh, it was undoubtedly attributed to him, and he was a strong disciplinarian, but he also was a decent human being, and he did a lot to. That's why this recent reunion up at the high school, from the 1950s to 60s, there was a huge crowd of people who graduated from high school in that time frame, and they were very interested in Gary Tarbox's showing of the history of the 1950s basketball teams, and he left just a lot of good marks on the court, I'll tell you.
You seem to find a lot. I mean, as such a small school,
right,
competing with the larger ones,
right,
you had to really polish up some raw talent.
Right. And we were, and people in Seattle who, when Anna's course come down, they would think that we were the size of Lincoln of Seattle, which was 3,000 students, and we were about 500 to 600, and generally we're among the smallest teams in that big AA tournament format.
Yeah, I thinking about some of the players that come to mind as from that basketball era.
Well, you have Don Daniels, who died recently. He was not only a straight A student, captain of the basketball team, captain of the baseball team. He was just genuinely an outstanding person who ultimately came back and to live permanently in Anacortes, and then he died about a year ago, which was a tragic loss to the community, because he truly was a person who made it and is giving back, and I admire people like that immensely.
Gary Keister.
Gary Keister, he was another one, and he came back for the reunion. And Gary was not only an outstanding basketball player, he was a good citizen in high school.
I noted his name on several of those state trophies.
Right, right.
And people speak pretty highly of the skills of Orville Breckenridge.
Orville Breckenridge. Were you in the room when that came up? Oh, well, someone brought up the name of Orville Breckenridge as one of the absolute outstanding all-around athletes who ever went to Anacortes High School. I hadn't looked at it that way, but it didn't seem to get an argument. And that was when Gary Keister was showing these slides, and he came up in one of the pictures. Hold on for just a moment. Does anyone want to go to the bathroom, get a glass of water, or do something that I don't want you to die? And of course, my father was born here. Are we on camera?
Yeah, we are. We're good.
My father was born here in 1892. I was born here in 1922. My brother Jim was born here in 1925, and my brother Charlie was born here in 1927. So I had two brothers, one who's no longer living. Charlie is no longer living. But we have all been more or less, our roots have been here in Anacortes. My mother came here in 1919 to teach high school, and she came in on I think she came in on the Sol Dock. Isn't there a Sol Dock? Okay, well, she came in on the Sol Dock, and she was with a friend of hers who was also teaching here at the same time. And as she was on the gangplank coming down, she saw this man standing by a carriage to take her to the hotel, And she said, "There's the man I'm going to marry," and it turned out it was my father, and she did. And that is, I've always loved that little story that she just had hardly gotten off the boat when she had said, "That's the man I'm going to marry," and married my father, whose name was also Wally. And so then in 1950 I came back, and 2 years later Marianne, my wife, came to Anacortes also to teach in the high school, and she came with a Dolores Ringman and a Billy Manring and a Ringwall, Marianne Ringwall, and they called it the Three Ring Circus. And they all lived together in a little house up on 17th Street. But I met her, and subsequently in 1954 we were married, and our son Mark was born in 1954, or when? Did I say we were married in 54? And he was born in 55, and our son Carl was born in 57.
So the Funk men were interested in furthering their education.
Right. Well, I have a nephew named Steve whose wife Dee Dee teaches in the local school system. So we've been a family deeply involved with education. And so any...
And you were raised in the Father Tournay's Catholic Church?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And that's about as far as I want to take it. And I wasn't abused. I just, anyway.
Well, I bring it up not so much for the religious component,
right.
But he seemed to be somebody who had a community spirit.
Oh, and he did. He was really a remarkable person. I was a little bit too young to understand, just because he was also a real whiplasher. And I was scared to death of him, with him and the local police chief and my father. Those were the three people that I feared the most. And Father Tournay I graduated in a confirmation class with the Barcott girls, Franny and Catherine, right? And
who participated in your the Poston survey?
Right, they did. Yeah. Oh, there were just lots of people, and it was wonderful to see how that Poston thing put itself together. Look, it was the survey that you have in your hands that was a remarkable definition of what's going on here in Anacortes. And they did churches and city government and schools and theater, everything. And it really was a major factor in the change. Ultimately, I think you have to relate it to the Poston study and a few other things. That's how Anacortes won the All-America City Award in 1962. Bud Strom and I went back to Miami Beach, Florida. The town had a collection, and as I often said, that they gave Bud a round-way trip, and they gave me one way. But it's not true. We did, but we went down there and made the presentation, and the head juror was Dr. George Gallup, and his name it's not George. Anyway, it was Dr. Gallup was the foreman of the jury, and it was the head of the United States Chamber of Commerce was there, and Junior Chamber of Commerce, Municipal League. All these people were represented on the jury that we had to confront, and we were the first one to. I was never more distressed in my whole life as I was that day, when here we were in this big ballroom with chandeliers and the like, and the jurors all sitting up there like I was pleading for my life, and number one on the list of those to make the presentation. After it was all over, 2 days later, we were going out to Hialeah, where they were having a dinner for all of us. And I told Bud, let's wait till the last bus. I don't want to see anybody. I don't want to be around anybody. So we did. And here on this bus came all the jurors onto that bus, and sat right beside me with Dr. Gallup. And he said, well, how did you think you did? And I said, I think we won. And he said, well, you don't lack for confidence. And I said, well, if I did, they sent the wrong person. And he said, touche. And I always remember, but it was, because here I just didn't want to see anybody. And here's the head man of the whole shebang, and he's sitting right beside me. and Bud and I'll tell you, at that time we went up to, and because of Shell Oil, we had a contact with the Secretary of Commerce of the United States. His name was, give me a moment, and I'll think of it. But anyway, that we were able to go up to his office. He had a daughter and a son-in-law who were with Shell Oil, and they lived, and their names were Bernard, Betsy and Don Bernard. Don was ultimately on one of the good councils that we ever had in the late 50s, and he was among those on that council. But anyway, because of that contact, and he had breakfast for us in this wonderful paneled dining room and all that, and he, when we talked about Anacortes, he had someone bring out some files, and here described Anacortes to a T. But here we were with just because of that little thing in Anacortes, and these two Shell people were just absolutely marvelous local citizens. And despite all their background, her father had originally been the governor of North Carolina. Luther Hodges was his name. Luther Hodges. Okay.
And so are you able to tell the story of the having to hold the news on the All-American City and how that affected the election?
Oh, yeah. We were back here, and in February we made our presentation in November of 1961, and then that they were to announce in February who the winners were. Well, here we were having this knockdown, drag-out election in Anacortes, and the Black Hats ultimately won a majority on the council, and the Black Hats were the guys that they didn't even believe in the All-America City Award, that it was just a fraud. And but anyway, so before the election, I finally thought, I'm going to call this gal who was the head of the National Municipal League, call her and tell her what our situation is, that it was, well, the day of the election was going to be the day that they announced the winners. And we were a week in advance. We wanted to announce the All-America City Award thing for Anacortes, and she said, if you do, you'll not make it, because it's just a rule that it can't. So we didn't, and so there's the banner headline, Anacortes All-America City, and the next headline below was that the rascals had been thrown out on the good council, and we had the negative council. But I thought, well, that's the way she goes. But
you had the news that you.
Oh yeah, we had won. They had come out here. Look magazine came out here. That is no longer published, but they came out here and took pictures all around, and we appeared in Look magazine of that as one of the. The reason they call it the All-America City Award, they select 11 cities. And there were 22 who were back there in Miami Beach who had reached the finals. It started out from hundreds, and by the time it got back there, it was down to 22 cities, and then finally Anacortes was one of the 11 cities that won. And one of the things is that they have never been able, after we left town, of course they never were able to find the flag and this wonderful framed certificate, huge certificate, that we got acknowledging us as an Anacortes All-America City. And I've often felt, well, I'll not let my thoughts. But anyway, if you're looking around someplace, maybe you'll find it someday that they just stuck it away because it no longer was relevant. But there's an old saying, once you are an All-America City, you are forever. And they still have it out on this entry to the city, that the Anacortes All-America City, and so we still it is something that we accomplished in this here in Anacortes, and it was a community accomplishment. So many people had done so many things, and all the things that we've gone through, even the basketball team, the post and study, city manager thing, and all of the streets paper, all those things, new schools, and a lot of emphasis was on education during that time too. As it is, I look at the current from from 1990 to, let's say, just right up to today, there is a similarity between the Anacors of the 1950s and the Anacors of the 1990s and early 2000s. Except this time it's bigger and better with libraries and schools and city hall and streets paving and new housing and an incredible number of talented newcomers who are coming here and seeing this to them is heaven. And I just am astonished. Every once in a while I'll meet somebody, like a guy who he votes in the Academy Awards in Hollywood, and he's living here in Anacortes, and he's still involved in every year. And there was a story in the Anacortes American about him, and there are so many others. It's only the tip of the iceberg. Writers that are just and photographers. There are some wonderful ones around here, and so
we're Anacortes is in another period of growth and change and, in a sense, progress.
Right.
Do you have a sense of where that's heading, or where you'd like it to head?
I actually don't. Of course, there was when we left here in 1964, we went over to Whidbey Island. It wasn't that far away from Anacortes, but it was an entirely different community, a different life, a different challenge, and that we were there for 25 years and then came back and we bought this house in 1989. And when we came back, it was just the beginning of this incredible expansion that's taking place right now. And I, came back to town thinking, oh, there'll be parades and banquets and everything to welcome me home, and I hardly knew the name of anybody who was here after 25 years of being over there. It was quite. I still have my good old friend Bud Strom, and we're both hanging in there together.
Oh, I think that you're, as I see you walking down the street, you're in a sense I guess I mean this in a respectful way.
Right.
I've seen the king of Anacortes, and
right.
that you have. You will go out of your way to make people feel welcome.
I feel good about it. I really do. It's like the high school reunion. I just thoroughly enjoyed it, and I met so many people I hadn't seen for years. And I was a student of high school annuals, so this was a kind of a time was sort of interesting because I remembered a lot of them, and everyone doesn't change that dramatically. But I was.
Hello, gentlemen.
Yes. And that. Let's see, that was my wife, incidentally, who just come home from a long lunch. And now,
you're a student of annuals, and
yes, and when I was in high school, and I went clear back, I found the first annual, the one that was published in 1910, and they used that. That was something where they got the start for this 100th anniversary thing, because the first class graduated from here in 1906, and there were just 2 students, 1 girl and 1 boy. And then the first annual was published in 1910. But I just love going through them. And now, what?
Well, I guess I was looking at this, the 50th rhododendron. I imagine you had a hand in the 1960 edition. Just
right.
I see so many of the photos, the historic
right.
photos from the museum.
Right,
shown
right.
in here.
We had, when we were here, we gave a lot of pictures to annuals because I still do. I love the high school, and I enjoy working with them. Like just this little bit that we had to do with the annual this year, I was so impressed with those. There were 5 girls, weren't there? Right, and I would just
1 boy.
And okay. I guess I just was paying attention to the girls, but anyway, they really impressed me. And they were very kind to me, and old though I am, I still am in there fighting. And one thing that I think that so many changes are taking place in the area called Old Anacortes, the hotel being right across the street, that theater has been transformed into a bank that is it's just awesome. If you haven't gone in there, go in and just take a look at it. It is superbly done. And the fellow who was responsible for it is an Anacortes High School graduate in Trafton is his name, Mike Trafton. And he is an architect. And I thought, well, what are you doing here as the manager? And he majored in economics, and he's now the head of the bank. And he is just an outstanding man. He designed that whole bank. And he showed me some of the sketches he had done, and where they should be framed, that these are really, they're works of art. And then he has things related to Anacortes on a little, have you been there? Yeah, okay. So anyway, it just, if you're just walking through, is do it, because you will be just amazed at what's become of the old Paramount Theater, which later became the Island Theater, which later became a bank, and now it is a bank again. And I think this is the way it will remain forever, because that is a marvelous bank. All right.
How are you doing? Are you? Is it seem a good place to call it a day for now?
I think if there's anything else that you want to ask is that because it is a little bit stressful.
Yeah.
And
you're doing great.
Well,
it's coming across. I mean, the picture here is just
right.
Great. And
what I'm looking at is that you're asking me the questions. That is because it gives me, not that I don't have to think of the question and the answer as well. And this gets me off, and I do have, I think, still clear recollections of who did what to whom.
I guess that's where I've run out of my prepared questions.
Right.
We can do that.